So, today we're going to be looking at recordings of Verdi's La Forza del Destino, obviously a great opera and a lot of great recordings of it, and we'll be looking at these recordings and reviewing it. But before we do that, as usual, let's take a look at the checkpoints for each character. The first one is obviously the biggest role, the soprano role, Leonora di Vargas. A lot of great sopranos have sung this, but it's a very difficult role to execute perfectly. And well, the checkpoint I've chosen is her aria Pace Pace Mio Dio. Quite obvious choice because the role of Leonora is one that requires, in some parts, extreme lyricism and in some parts, extreme dramaticism. So, for example, in the prayer scene, La Vergine degli Angeli, Leonora di Vargas needs a very, very lyrical voice. It has to be able to, pull out pianissimi and float these notes and whatnot. But when it comes to, like, some big arias, like Madre Pietosa Vergine and the duet with Padre Guardiano, these kind of scenes, Leonora needs a very dramatic voice, a very big one, a penetrating one with true Italian dramaticism, Italian dramatic soprano temperament, and all of that. Yeah. So Pace Pace in this one aria, we can listen to both, because obviously, the dynamics is a very important part of this aria. The very first note on the F natural, it is customary to start off with pianissimo, a crescendo up to a forte, and then a decrescendo back to a pianissimo on that one note. And then, of course, the aria for the first part is lyrical, it is gentle singing. And then we have two B flats, right? The first B flat in Pace Pace Mio Dio, it's pianissimo, it's written pianissimo, I believe, and you really need to have the dynamic control to be able to float it, to carry it above the orchestra in a pianissimo, without being, too soft, but you need to have that dynamic control, for sure. And then, at the very end, her famous Malediziones, should be pretty obvious. You need the dramatic temperament, you need very dramatic singing, and that last B flat has to be blasted at full volume. So in this one aria, you can listen to the two B flats, and basically you can determine whether or not this Leonora is a good one, because a good Leonora di Vargas has to have lyrical singing and very dramatic singing, and in this one aria you can hear whether she has both. And then we move on to the checkpoint of the tenor and the baritone, respectively, Don Alvaro and Don Carlo. Both of their checkpoints come in their duets in Act 4, In Vano Alvaro. Let's talk about the tenor first. Alvaro's checkpoints starts from his words of Se I rimorsi, il pianto omai, and it runs through un brando uscite un brando. Why these particular lines? Well, Alvaro has to sing a low B flat on Io mi prosto al vostro piede. That low B flat is, I believe, the lowest note in the entire tenor repertory. And for an Alvaro is not a lyric tenor role by any means. It is a very, a spinto role, which requires dramatic temperament and lyrical singing in different parts of the role. And for a lyric tenor or a very light one to have a low B flat is a very rare occasion. So if the B flat, low B flat, is very resonant, then you can almost consider that the tenor is one that has enough voice to do the role. A spinto or a dramatic or a lyric voice with a lyric tenor with a lot of voice, those can do Alvaro. But if the low B flat is inaudible because the voice is small, then it's probably not a good, voice for the role. And then runs through uscite un brando, and then on un brando, that is the high B flat, so 2 octaves of singing. On that high B flat, the dramatic part of the role has to, come out, because, well, he is challenging Carlo to a duel, right? So that dramatic high B flat blasted out at full volume. If you have the 2 notes, the 2 B flats, 1 low, 1 high, then it's basically a good enough Alvaro. Carlo's checkpoint comes immediately after un brando uscite un brando. It starts with the absolutely iconic finalmente. That finalmente is one of the most famous lines in all of opera, and rightly so, because that single note, finalmente, finally, you were challenging me to a duel. And that finalmente has to be sung with incredible voice. It has to blast open the microphones. It's not particularly high, but it's around the passaggio. So finalmente, that E natural on the men in finalmente, it's on the passaggio, and it has to be done very well, because if you can handle a massive volcanic voice on an E natural just on the passaggio, then you're guaranteed to do Annie Verdi real well. And of course, after that, Don Carlo just has another F sharp in this role. Ti consacro il disonore. And that F sharp on disonore, again, it has to be a volcanic voice, a big one that blasts open the microphone, because a very dramatic moment. And then Alvaro and Carlo join and sing simultaneously, of course, and these are the parts until vieni a morte andiamo. When they sing simultaneously at the end of this duet, it's basically a face-off, because they're going into a duel, right? They're trying to kill each other, and that's why it's a direct face-off of volume and of dramaticism. And here, basically, you should hear their full volume and their full dramaticism in this simultaneous singing after Ti consacro il disonore. And this duet is the checkpoint for both the tenor and the baritone roles. A very interesting point is that there are a few baritones that take the high A natural at the very end of this duet with Alvaro, because, well, Alvaro is killed by Carlo, so it would only make sense if Carlo dominates Alvaro on the last note on the A natural and not going down for a harmony. Of course, I know that some baritones can't sing the A natural, but if you can, you should definitely do it. Leonard Warren does it, and very interestingly, Leonard Warren, singing his Iago, he doesn't go for the high A at the very end of the duet with Otello, like Cheryl Milnes does in both operas. That's very clever by Warren, because here in Forza, Carlo is the baritone, is the victorious one, and he has to dominate Alvaro on that A natural at the end of the duet, because, well, he is going to kill Alvaro. But then in Otello, Iago isn't the one that actually executes the act. He is the perpetrator behind Otello's evil acts, but he is not the directly involving in the murder of Desdemona. And because he is the perpetrator, he is the person behind the entire thing. The harmony going down is the more suitable choice, because he is the one behind the scenes, and that's why he goes down to form the harmony. But here in Forza, it's a different case, because they're facing off each other, and the baritone is eventually the victorious one, and that's why I can accept the baritone going up to an A natural here, and it would be a fairly good choice, musically speaking, to do so. And then for our next checkpoint, we have the bass role, Padre Guardiano. And I've chosen a few lines from his big duet with Leonora, starting from A te sia gloria, O Dio clemente, and then until Il tuo voler si compirà. why this line and not, the end of, this duet. Well, let's just say that, Guardiano, he has two massive E naturals to blast at the end of, each part of the duet with Leonora, the aria and the cappelletta parts. He can blast the E natural at the end of each one of them. And of course, it would be very great to have a very big bass blasting out high notes at full volume, but I don't think that's the character of Guardiano. It's not the context behind what Guardiano as a character is like, because Guardiano shouldn't be a big evil Mephistopheles kind of bass. Guardiano is a good character, and he is the guardian father, after all. That's why I would prefer a more how to say so, a more round and voluminous voice, a warm one, instead of Mephistopheles evil, a hellish voice, and that's why I've chosen to showcase his low notes here on Il tuo voler si compirà, the last note of which is a low F natural. And because normally a more warmer, a more voluminous bass like Padre Guardiano should have a better lower register than a higher one. And that's why if you have a very good, low F, a very big and voluminous one, it's probably a very warm and grand voice instead of a hellish, devilish voice, like Mephistopheles, in which you would highlight a high note, a high F, or stuff like that. So if you can have a very loud and a very warm low F here, then it's basically a pretty good Guardiano for the rest of the role. Warm singing as a, as a harmony for Leonora. And at last, for the role of Preziosilla, it's not a big role, I don't think so at all, because Preziosilla's music is very, it's not important, it's just, fluff and a bit of a buffo element to Forza. I think that's too much buffo to Forza, because it's a very serious opera. Of course, it's the Force of Destiny, but there's like 15 buffo characters in here. But Preziosilla still has some pretty demanding music. I don't think that the Rataplan, the famous, part of Preziosilla, is a very demanding one. Of course, it has runs up to high C's, but you can just, no one would really care if you don't nail the Preziosilla and you don't nail your Rataplan, but I've decided to include something else anyway. This is her aria, sort of aria, Al suon del tamburo, at the very start of the second act, because Carlo, a very big role, is also there in this scene, and a Preziosilla would be able to steal the show from Carlo at the start of Act 2 with two very big high B naturals, which have to be held, unlike the two high C's in the Rataplan, which are basically just sliding up to that one, yeah? And that's why I've chosen Al Suon del Tamburo for Preziosilla. But all things concerned, I'm not that big a fan of Preziosilla's music, and I don't really care whether or not it's perfectly executed. That's just me, though. But I think now it's time to get into our recordings, yeah? Of course, the first category, good and commercially available recordings. We have 5 here as usual. The first one I've chosen is from 1941. It is conducted by Gino Marinuzzi with the orchestra and chorus of the Turin Radio. Maria Caniglia is Leonora di Vargas, Carlo Tagliabue is Don Carlo, Don Alvaro is Galiano Mazzini, Preziosilla is Ebestignani, and Padre Guardiano is Tancredi Pasero. Maria Caniglia as Leonora di Vargas. You cannot deny that Caniglia is a, textbook Italian dramatic soprano voice. The Italian dramatic temperament is there. But some would say that Cornelia's singing is too matronly, which yeah, it's true. But I mean, for Leonora, the part of Leonora, it's difficult to find a soprano with both lyricism and extreme dramaticism. Of course, there are sopranos who can do both, but it's very limited. Not everyone is Tebaldi, and that's why Cornelia is still a very good Leonora, because she nails her dramatic parts of this role. The La Vergine degli Angeli, those scenes aren't the most lyrically sung, but Madre Pietosa Vergine and especially Pace Pace Mio Dio is very dramatic. A whole lot of Italian sound in there, and it is a very good Leonora, all things concerned. For the two male lead roles, I would say, between Galliano Mazzini and Carlo Tagliabue, both are really good, I would say. But Tagliabue here is relatively young, and his voice, I don't think, has truly exploited its dramaticism, and as a result, Galliano Mazzini, a very good dramatic tenor, here sounds almost as dark as Tagliabue does, which doesn't completely fit the drama. Mazzini is a very, very good tenor. His dramatic singing here is absolutely top class, and Tagliabue is a great baritone as well. I just feel that his singing in the Serafin set, about 13 years later, he sings more dramatically there. But here he isn't bad either. By no means is. But Mazzini steals the show from him a bit. Ebbe Stignani as Preziosilla, well, I think that it's too big a voice to navigate through those coloratura passages, and it's a bit awkward for a voice of her size and a voice with such beauty to be doing these, fluff and buffo roles, yeah. But Tancredi Pasero as Padre Guardiano is another very good addition to this recording. He has a very voluminous and a warm voice, and that is what you want from a Guardiano, and a very dark, a deep, and a warm voice, and that is the ideal voice for a Padre Guardiano. Then we have the Serafin 54 set, in studio, of course, with the orchestra and chorus of the Teatro La Scala. Maria Callas is Leonor di Vargas, Calio Tagliabue is Don Carlo, Richard Tucker, Don Alvaro, Elena Nicolai is Preziosilla, Nicola Rosi Lemeni sings Padre Guardiano, and Renato Capecci is from Melitone here. Callas Leonora di Vargas this is not a good recording, all things concerned, for Callas, because, well, firstly, this was made right after she had stopped her weight loss, and she had no control over her voice in this recording. The musicality, you can hear that it's there. You can hear the dramaticism that she had in her musicality, but voice-wise, it's not a good recording for her at all. And besides, the role of Leonora di Vargas, I don't believe was that good a fit for her voice, because it is fully Italian dramatic soprano, not verismo, but a typical very Verdi role, and that's not her specialty. I wouldn't say so. Carlo Tagliabue as Carlo, here I've said that he is in better dramaticism here than the 41 recording, and here he sings with intent. He sings with a very big voice, which we don't hear in the 41 recording. Much better here than that one. And Richard Tucker as Alvaro is another great addition to this recording, because Tucker, along with Corelli and Delmonico, are the greatest Alvaros of our generation. And Tucker here is in good form. I would say that he didn't usually record very well in studio, but this is an exception. He was still a bit young here, and he still had the uh, unrestrained, wild Italian temperament, which he lost a bit later. Elena Nicolai's Giosilla. I don't care about her music, yeah? But Nicolai is such a great mezzo soprano, and I feel like she's wasting her artistry doing these roles. Yeah, I shouldn't be talking about, how Preziosila's music is shit, because I think that I've already gotten my point through, but yeah. And Nicola Rossi Lemeni as Padre Guardiano, not a bad voice at all, but I just feel like Padre Guardiano is a bit too low for him. He is, of course, a very good bass baritone, but with the tessitura sitting lower than most roles that he would have sung, it's not warm enough and deep enough a voice for a character like Padre Guardiano. The next one here we have is from 1955 with Francesco Molinari Pradelli conducting Santa Cecilia Orchestra, Renato Tebaldi as Leonora di Vargas, Ettore Bastianini, Don Carlo, Mario del Monaco, Don Alvaro, Giulietta Simeonato, Preziosilla, Padre Guardiano is Cesare Siepi, and Fra Militone is Fernando Correena. Let's start with Tebaldi, shall we, in this recording? I will include, her live ones, and I will talk about that in the later category. But let's talk about this one. In this recording, her Leonora is lyrically oriented, I would say. It doesn't have that much dramaticism in her live recordings, which is, it is normal, because in studio you would want to be a bit more subdued, you want to tune things down a bit, and that's why she sings with more lyricism here than her live ones. Of course, Tebaldi is the greatest Leonora di Vargas, that is without a doubt, but here in the studio recording it just pales a bit in comparison with her live recordings, because the dramaticism she displayed in those live recordings is more representative of the character of Leonora than here. Bastianini and Del Monaco, two very big voices, but only Bastianini out of the two recorded well in studio. And this isn't an exception. Bastianini's Carlo here is exceptional. It is among his best Carlos, but because Carlo's music is like 90% with Alvaro, Del Monaco, who didn't record that well in studio, kind of takes away the thrill, because we have live recordings of Del Monaco, we have live recordings of Bastianini, but when we put these two together in studio, the excitement is just lacking compared to the live recordings that we have. But Cesare Siepi as Padre Guardiano, he capitalized on the studio conditions, and he demonstrated a very full-voiced, deep, dark, and a warm Padre Guardiano, and he set the standard for this role. I truly believe so. He is the best Padre Guardiano we have heard. And Giulietta Simeonato as Preziosilla. I think Simeonato fit the role much better than other mezzos would have, because her agility and her kind of flaunty voice is used to its advantages for the music of Preziosilla, and Simeonato is the greatest Preziosilla we have heard. And all things concerned, this is a very good recording, but for Tebaldi, Bastianini, and Del Monaco, they just don't give off the same impression as the live recordings with all its excitement and glory gives off. Next, we have a recording from 1958 conducted by Fernando Previtali in studio. Orchestra and chorus is again Santa Cecilia. Zenka Milanov is Leonora di Vargas. Leonard Warren, Don Carlo. Giuseppe Di Stefano, Don Alvaro. Rosalind Elias is Preziosilla. And Giorgio Tozzi is Padre Guardiano. What I think about this set, it isn't a particularly exciting one, and I'll explain why. Let's start with Zinka Milanov, shall we? Again, her live recordings will be in our next category, in our live recordings category, but This Leonora in studio, much like Tibaldi, it is more lyrically oriented, because this is towards more closer to the end of Milanov's career, and I will explain the trend of her Leonoras later. But this is among one of her last Leonoras, and that's why she didn't have the dramatic temperament, Italian dramatic temperament that she once had, and she resorted to focusing more on the lyrical aspect of this role, and she uses more of her Slavic voice to kind of build a creamy, marbly texture in those lyric parts, and she sacrificed the dramatic, red hot dramatic temperament for those creamy and marbly tones. And Leonard Warren as Don Carlo. I believe Warren is the best Carlo that we have heard. I think that is quite the statement, but I think that Warren here as Carlo is one of the only roles that he excelled even more so than Ettore Bastianini. The character, the role, the music just fit his voice perfectly, and well, it is the Forza del Destino that caused him to end his career on stage, ended his life in this role. I assume that you know about it, and if you don't, go check out what happened to him on that fateful night. And yeah, in studio, however, he suffers from the same problems as, the other big voices like Del Monaco that we've just talked about. The excitement is just lacking a bit. It isn't as outward and as explosive as you want to hear Carlo, and we have that in his live recordings, which makes this a bit redundant. And Pipo Di Stefano as Alvaro, he will appear in this video quite a few times, but I'm going to make my statement here. I don't think that Alvaro is Di Stefano's role at all. I don't think so, because while he can do verismo very well by sacrificing his voice and going all out and just going wild, Verdi is not the same case as verismo. This is a Verdi role in which you have to go all out, but you still have to have the dramaticism, the temperament in the voice when doing so, unlike in verismo where you can just yell your throats out without caring about the temperament and the all the stuff there. And Di Stefano as Alvaro, it is not a fit for him, and I don't like Di Stefano's recordings of Alvaro. And Giorgio Tozzi here as Guardiano. He usually recorded well in studio, but here I don't know why, but he just doesn't sound very convincing. His voice here recorded a bit hollow, but that isn't the case in his live recordings and most of his studio recordings. I don't know why he doesn't sound that good here, but that's basically it. Then, for the last recording in this category, we have a recording from 1964 conducted by Thomas Shippers with the RCA Italian Orchestra. Leontyne Price is Leonora di Vargas, Robert Merrill is Don Carlo, Richard Tucker, Don Alvaro, Shirley Verrett is Preziosilla, Giorgio Tozzi is Padre Guardiano, and Ezio Flagello is Melitone. Leontyne Price, I think that this Forza del Destino is her best recording, and she is in absolutely glorious form here. The lyric singing is all there. She doesn't suffer from the collapsed head voice problem that she often did in live recordings. There is none of that here. It is a very solid voice, a very creamy tones, and those creamy tones are used very well in the lyrical parts, where she could, float piano, have all that creamy, all the lyrical stuff going on. But then for the dramatic parts, she doesn't lose that kind of Italian temperament, which she often lacked a bit in her other recordings. She has all of that Italian red hot temperament here in this recording, and it is a very, very fine reading of the role of Leonora, and it is one that you should absolutely listen to. For Robert Merrill and Richard Tucker, of course, they have a very famous video of their FORZA duet at the Met Gala '72, but that's a bit past their prime for both of them. Here in 1964, both of their voices are in glorious condition, but this is in studio, and that's why they've toned it down a little bit. It isn't as explosive as outwards as exciting as you would want it to be, but both Merrill and Tucker have live recordings of their in respective roles that I will mention later. Just that this one is a bit toned down because of studio conditions. Tozzi is better recorded here as Guardiano than the 58 recording I've just mentioned. Shirley Verrett is a decent Preziosi here. And Ezio Flagello as Fra Melitone, he would record Guardiano live later, which I will also mention. And he has a great bass voice. He had low E flats and a high baritone A flat, and it's just a voice that is so often overlooked. 2.5 octaves, man. And it is a great injustice that he was mostly limited to doing buffa roles during his career. Then we have our collection of live recordings. We'll start with one from 1943 from the Metropolitan, conducted by Bruno Walter. It has Stella Roman as Leonora di Vargas, Lawrence Tibbett as Don Carlo, Frederick Jägel as Don Alvaro, Ira Pettina as Preziosilla, Ezio Pinza as Padre Guardiano, and Melitone is Salvatore Baccaloni. Stella Roman as Leonora. This is a very, very good Leonora. Although she did not have the Italian temperament per se, as Caniglia did, but she really tries to make things as dramatic as possible, and that's what I appreciate about this Leonora. She uses her voice and creates a dramatic setting to every one of them by changing the color of the tones and all of that. And for the big moments, for the big dramatic moments, she has the voice and she has the dramatic color to them. But what she really excelled here in this recording is the lyric parts, where she could really have a opulent and a translucent tone to it, which can navigate through the lyricism very well. And all things concerned, this is one of the best readings of the role of Leonora di Vargas I've ever heard. It deserves to be up there with Tebaldi and Milanov's versions, and it is a very, very underrated Leonora by Stella Roman. Lawrence Tibbett and Frederick Jägel here. This was not a good night for Lawrence Tibbett. He still had a lot of voice in 1943, I must say, but it's not a good night for him. And Frederick Jägel often dominated him in their scenes together, which is basically 90% of Carlo's music. Speaking of that, Frederick Jägel is a very good Alvaro here. He has, a spinto, almost dramatic voice in this Alvaro, which is surprising because we often know him as, someone that would take more lighter roles, more lyric roles like Alfredo, like Edgardo. No, but this Alvaro, it has, almost a dramatic timbre, and it is a glorious, glorious sound. Italian, a straightforward one, a spinto that can cut through the orchestra, and it is a very, very good Alvaro. Ezio Pinza here as the Guardiano is luxurious casting, of course. What a bass voice. It isn't the lowest of bass voices, but it has a very voluminous and deep tone to it. That is, the velvety tone is just perfect for Guardiano and is very pleasing to the ears. The rest of the cast here are also decent, and Bruno Walter here conducts exceptionally well. I've always thought that his Verdi is a bit underrated and overlooked by most people because we know him for his Beethoven and stuff, but no, his Verdi is also very good, and this proves it. Then we have a bunch of recordings here. It's not one single recording, but these are all related under the fact that they are live recordings of the role with Zinka Milanov in the title role. They are from 1952, 1953, 1954, and 1956 respectively. With the exception of the 1953 recording, these are all from the Metropolitan and conducted by Fritz Stidry. The 53, however, is from the New Orleans Opera and conducted by Walter Herbert. Let's take a look at the different casts. For the 52 recording, Leonard Warren is Don Carlo, Richard Tucker is Don Alvaro, Mildred Miller is Prediosilla, and Jerome Hines is Padre Guardiano. For the 53 at New Orleans, we have Leonard Warren as Don Carlo again, Mario Del Monaco is Don Alvaro this time, Clara May Turner is Prediosilla, and William Wilderman is Padre Guardiano. We also have a young Norman Treigel as the Marquis of Calatrava here. For the 54, where we return to Stidry's baton, we have again Leonard Warren as Don Carlo, Gino Peno is Don Alvaro this time, Jean Madeira takes the role of Prediosilla, and Jerome Hines repeats his role as Padre Guardiano. For a final recording in this bunch, from 1956, we have Leonard Warren and Richard Tucker repeating their roles from the 1952 recording. Rosalind Eloise is Prediosilla this time, and Cesar Siepi is Padre Guardiano, with the addition of Fernando Correna as Melitone. Let's start with Milanov. We have a trend here, unlike Tebaldi, which I will talk about later. We have a trend here, which is 52 is the most dramatic and 56 is the most lyrical. The 58 studio, which I've already talked about, is even more lyrical than the 56, so we can see that there's a trend here. And for the 52 recording, she is absolutely in wild, dramatic form. She just goes unrestrained and she blasts out notes with attack, with accent, especially the maledizione is blasted at full volume and would absolutely destroy the roof of the theater of the Met. But then it gradually got a bit more lyrical and more focusing on interpretation instead of just wild, unrestrained blasting here in the 52 recording. For the 53 recording at New Orleans, the dramatic temperament is not, a great decline from the 52 recording, but she fails to hold the maledizione, and there is a significantly more lyricism to this than the 52 recording in terms of, sliding up to the notes, the portamenti, and, it's more of a creamy tone that brings us through the role of Leonora instead of the unrestrained wildness we have in the 52. The 54 is more so, even more lyrical, even more interpretative. There's more opulence in the voice here than both 52 and 53, both of which we haven't seen much. But her high notes are still there. Her high notes are still there even for the 58 recording at the very end. And the notes were always there. It's just how the interpretation and the tone of the voice changed. And for the 56 finally, this is very lyrical, very, focused on the portamenti and the creamy tone, and basically abandons the dramatic blasting that she had in the 52. The 58 studio is more so lyrical than the 56, but I've already talked about that. These are basically the chronology of Milanov's live Leonoras. And if I had to choose one of these four, it would definitely be the 52. Although the lyricism isn't there, but the dramatic quality of this recording is absolutely superb. Not to mention that she already had a great deal of lyricism here. It just so happens that she focused more on that later in her career, where she was no longer able to, make a great deal out of her voice. So the 52 is all around very, very great for Milanov's Leonora. But for the rest of the cast, these are, different cases. Leonard Warren and Richard Tucker are the Don Carlo and Alvaro on both the 52 and the 56 recordings. I would say that the 52 is more youthful, it's more, it's more unrestrained, it's more wild, and it's more straightforward singing. And of course, Warren always dominates Tucker on the high A. but I mean Tucker doesn't mind. For the 56 recording for these two, it's more refined. It has more tone changes. The solidity of the voice is still there. It's still very straightforward, but it's just a tad bit more refined than the 52 and a tad bit less wild. For the 53 and 54 recordings, we still have Leonard Warren as Don Carlo, but Alvaro here are Delmonico and Gino Penn respectively on the two sets. Delmonico is a greater Alvaro than Penno, obviously, and he matches Warren's volume and dramaticism in the 53 recording, which should be the case because for the first half of the opera they're friends, for the second half they're enemies, and that's why an equilibrium should be there. It should always be a matching voice in terms of volume and dramaticism, and Delmonico matches the standards that Warren has set. For Gino Penno, it's straightforward singing, it's Italian spinto cutting through the orchestra, but as we can hear on the high A on the at the end of their duet, Warren completely covers Penno, and I mean Penno never stood a chance against Leonard Warren, unlike Delmonico and Tucker, and that's why out of these three, I would consider Tucker and Delmonico to be equal as Alvaro, while Penno is just a bit underwhelming. For the role of Padre Guardiano, Jerome Hines sings in both the 52 and 54 recordings. He is an excellent Guardiano by all means, although he isn't, that deep a voice, but he is same as Ezio Pinza, a great voice that is straightforward, but at the same time it is deep and it is dark and a voluminous, a velvety tone. And for the 1953 recording, we have William Wilderman as Guardiano, which is a great disappointment with this cast because Wilderman is just a very weak bass all around. He doesn't have the round, warm tone that we want in a Guardiano. It's thin and it's not deep enough a voice. It's underwhelming. And Norman Trigal as the Marquis sings very well in this 53 recording, and I think it would be much better if they had switched roles, really. And for our final one, the 56 live, we have Cesare Siapi as Guardiano. I've already talked about his Guardiano. It is the number one Guardiano and it has set the standards. And here, his singing with Milanov is very, very well sung. Then we come to a bit of a trickier situation because our third inclusion is again not a single recording, but Tebaldi's live Leonoras. We have 5 here. One from 1953, one from 1954, one from 1955, one from 1956, and one from 1960. But unlike Milanov, we cannot see a trend here. But let me introduce the recordings first. From the 1953 is from Firenze, conducted by Dimitri Mitropoulos, with Aldo Proti and Mario Delmonico as Don Carlo and Don Alvaro. Cesare Siapi is Guardiano here, and Melitone is Renato Capecci. Fedora Barbieri is Preziosilla. For the 54 recording, the first 2 acts are from a recording from Rio de Janeiro, with Paolo Silveri as Don Carlo and Gino Penno as Don Alvaro. Giulietta Simonato is Preziosilla, and Giulio Neri is Padre Guardiano. But for Acts 3 and 4, it is taken from a recording from Napoli from the same year, with Antonio Mancasera as Don Carlo, Gino Penno as Don Alvaro, Miriam Perazzini as Preziosilla, and Giulio Neri is again the Guardiano. For 1955 recording, we have Antonino Votto on the podium. It is Aldo Proti as Don Carlo again. Giuseppe Di Stefano is Alvaro this time. Capecci is again Melitone, and this time Giuseppe Modesti is Guardiano. Giuseppe Zampieri is Trabucco, and Antonio Zerbini is Alcalde. And then we have a recording from 1956. This is from Florence again, with Gabriele Santini conducting this time. Gian Giacomo Guelfi is Carlo, Di Stefano is again Alvaro, and Barbieri is again Pregiusia. Giulio Neri is Guardiano here. For the 1960 recording, this is from the Metropolitan. It's conducted by Thomas Shippers. It is Richard Tucker as Alvaro, Mario Sereni as Carlo, Pregiusia is Mignon Dunn, and Jerome Hines is Guardiano here. So, Tebaldi singing in these 5 recordings. First one, 53. Lyrical in nature. A very emotionally oriented Leonora. It's by no means as lyrical as the 55 studio, which is the most lyrical singing that she has we have seen as her Leonora. But in this 53, it is very emotionally oriented. It sacrifices a bit of the dramatic temperament for more sorrowful singing in some parts, which is the emotional orientation of Leonora di Vargas, and she exemplifies the emotional sorrow of Leonora in the 53 recording. For the 54 recording, from Rio and Napoli, bits from both combined into one composite recording. In that recording, her Leonora is much more unrestrained. It's much wilder, and the dramatic temperament is increased in quite significant proportions. The lyrical side is still there, of course, but she focuses more on getting those incredible blasts out, and those incredible dramatic moments with dramatic temperament. She focuses on that in the 54 recording. For the 55 at La Scala, she peaked in dramaticism, so to speak. It is the most dramatic Leonora. We have heard from her. Di Maledizione, the B flat on that, is one of the most exciting and most hair-raising sounds that any human has ever produced, because she goes Maledizione, and that blast is hair-raising. Absolutely amazing singing, and very, very dramatic. Incredible reading of the role of Leonora. I personally believe this 55 recording to be the single best recording of the role of Leonora that we have heard, to be honest. For the 1956 recording, let's just say that she was not in her best voice in this recording. She probably had an off night, and that's why the reason she didn't focus much on blasting notes, and instead reverting back to getting more nuances and lyricism out. It isn't a very good night voice-wise for her, but interpretation-wise, it is more nuanced and detailed than the 54 and 55 recordings. Finally, we have our 1960 recording, a live one from the Metropolitan here. Her singing is more emotionally oriented, somewhat reminiscent of the 53 recording. It is more sorrowful, and it has more of a tear-like quality in her voice. Between the 56 and 60 recordings, though, we have another recording of Tebaldi's live Leonora, but because it has a video, I've put it in the 4th category. But for the sake of continuation, let's talk about her singing here as Leonora first. In between 56 and 60, both of which are more emotionally and nuanced oriented, the 58 is a resurgence of the more wild and unrestrained side of her Leonora, but it is combined this time with also the sorrow and the lyricism that she had in 53, 56, and 60. So it is an amalgam of both the unrestrained and the lyric side of Leonora singing. So this is her most balanced Leonora, so to speak. For the rest of the cast here, in the 53 recording of Florence, we have Aldo Protti as Carlo and Mario Del Monaco as Alvaro. Protti's Carlo is, we can't deny that Aldo Protti was a big voice, a dark voice, a very Italian Verdi baritone voice, and I applaud him for that. But I've always found his singing a bit too cardboard and a bit too coarse. It's not detailed enough, and that's why even though he blasts out, wild and impressive sounds, I can't, put him among the best Carlos, simply for the reason because it's not as refined as it should be. However, Delmonico here is in absolutely hair-raising form, even more so than the New Orleans recording with Milanov. And it's just a shame that Protti here isn't as good a partner as Warren was on the Orleans recording. But still, Delmonico is in very, very, very good form here. And Siepi is the usual excellent Guardiano, Capecci is the usual excellent Melitone, and Barbieri is Preziosia. She doesn't have the agility for the role, but I can see why she would want to take it. A very stereotypical Italian fluff mezzo role. It's not a bad reading of the role at all. From the 1954 recording, obviously it's two different nights from two different locations smashed together into one recording, but Gino Peno and Giulio Neri both sing in both recordings. Peno's Alvaro I've talked about already, but I think that this one is better than the Met that he had sung in the same year. It's more, well, maybe because it's a smaller house, he has the chance to sing more unrestrained and more straightforward, more wild, and his voice cuts through the orchestra much more sharper than he does in the Met recording. And this is a very, very good recording of the role of Alvaro in both the Rio Acts 1 and 2 and the Napoli Acts 3 and 4. And Peno is in great form in both. Giulio Neri as Guardiano. Well, the voice is very deep, very dark, and a very low voice, but it's a bit too, hellish for me. It's like he is the guardian of the gates of hell and not the Padre Guardiano guarding the monastery or whatever you call it. I don't know. But Neri is a very, very good bass, a true bass for sure, and you can't deny that. His vocalism, his singing per se here is of very, very good quality. For the differences in these two nights, we have Paolo Silveri as the Carlo in Acts 1 and 2 from Rio, and Antonio Mancasera as the Carlo for Acts 3 and 4 in Napoli. Silveri, I would suggest, is a bit better than Mancasera, for the reason that Silveri has a bit more nuance, whilst keeping the dramatic singing of Mancasera. But Mancasera has no more focus on the dramaticism and the excitement of singing, which is presented very well in his two acts as Carlo in Napoli. For Simonato's Preziosia from Rio is pretty well sung, and so is Pirazzini's Preziosia from Napoli. Then, the recording from 1955 has Protti again as Carlo and Di Stefano as Alvaro. I've said that, I've already mentioned why I'm not, fans of both in these respective roles. Giuseppe Modesti here as Padre Guardiano. It is a decent voice. It is a very warm and a deep voice, but it's not quite voluminous enough for me. But it's still a very good bass nonetheless. In the 56 recording at Florence, we have Di Stefano again as Alvaro. I'm not going to talk about that. Giulio Neri again as Guardiano. I'm not going to talk about that. But Gian Giacomo Guelfi here as Carlo. I think that, well, he is one of the best Carlos that we've heard. He is your typical Verdi baritone, beefy, big, wild, unrestrained singing, and that is what you want as Carlo. You want that unrestrained, absolutely, throwing everything out of your voice, having that beefy sound, and all of that is, added to the outgoing characterization of Carlo. It is much more unrestrained and wild in terms of the declamations and the dramatic singing, which has much more interpretation to it than Proteus does. And so Guelphi is an excellent Carlo here. Barbieri as per Josiah, I've already talked about that. For the 60 recording at the Met, we have Richard Tucker as Don Alvaro. I've already talked about that. Carlo here is Mario Sereni. I'm not a fan of Sereni in dramatic baritone roles. He is an excellent lyric baritone, but he is a bit too small a voice to be doing Verdi baritone roles, and that's why his Conte de Luna, his Don Carlo, I've never been completely unconvinced, because he's training a bit, because his voice per se is too small to be doing these roles, and that's why he's straining to get the voice out, and in doing so, it is getting a bit rough and ugly in terms of the voice. Jerome Hayes as Guardiano, I've already talked about that. Mignon Dunn as Preziosia, another decent mezzo, nothing special but a decent voice. Then we have another of these bunches of recordings packed into one inclusion. Sorry if I'm jam-packing too many recordings into this video, but that's what I've got to do. What these three recordings have in common is that they have Leila Hencher as Leonora di Vargas. The first one is from 1957, from La Scala, conducted by Antonino Voto. It has Aldo Protti and Di Stefano as Carlo and Alvaro. It has Cesare Siepi as Padre Guardiano, and it has Gabriela Cartoran as Preziosia. For our next recording, it's from 1964, from the Teatro Comunale di Bologna, conducted by Francesco Molinari Pradelli. I have to confess, I don't have the full recording. I only have highlights and the entirety of Hencher's role as Leonora. I only have those bits because I don't have the full recording. It's available online, but I don't have the money to buy it. Anyways, Hencher is Leonora here. Capocilli as Carlo Bergonzi as Alvaro, Carlo Cava as Guardiano, and Adriana Lazzarini as Preziosia. If you want to get the full recording, those are the information that you need. But I don't have it, and I don't have the money to get it. For our last one, it is from the Arena di Verona, yes, conducted by Franco Capuana. It has Capocilli again as Carlo, but Gianfranco Cecchele is Alvaro this time. Adriana Nazzarini is again Preziosia. We have Capecci as Melitone, and we have Ivo Vinco as Padre Guardiano. We can talk about Hencher's Leonora first, shall we? For the 57 recording, it is very lyrical in nature, very subdued, a lot of nuance, a lot of gentle singing, but not very straightforward and outgoing. But in the 64 at Bologna, at least the excerpts that I've heard of her role, it is outgoing, it is absolutely wild singing. She doesn't restrain herself at all into putting herself into the dramatic temperament of Leonora, and she does that perfectly here. For the 67 at Verona, she's reverted a bit to the more lyrical approach, because her voice is kind of running out, but she still hasn't lost 100% of the dramatic temperament. She has incorporated the dramatic temperament into the lyrical interpretation of this role, so it's a bit of both. Many people would say that Hencher doesn't have the voice for Leonora. I wouldn't agree 100%, but I can see where you're coming from, and you have every reason to believe so. But I just feel like Hencher's wild and unrestrained singing is good for Verdi. I know that she's more of a small voice, but she does Verdi justice, and I would believe that Verdi would have also thought so had he heard her voice in his repertoire. For the rest of the cast, 1957, Protti and Di Stefano, I've already talked about these two. CIPS Guardiano, I've talked about also. Gabriela Cartura, nothing special as Preziosia in the 57 recording. In the 64 recording, I don't have the full recording, so I can't talk about that. I can't talk about the rest of the cast. For the 67, It is from Arena di Verona. Piero Cappuccilli as Don Carlo. Cappuccilli's Carlo will appear quite a few times here, so I have to make a statement first. Cappuccilli is the baritone that I especially adore. In the late 70s, 80s, and the early 90s, I absolutely adore the lyric side of baritone singing that he delivers in those years, because although in the later part of his career there he didn't have the vocal solidity, but his interpretation, his sorrow in the voice was one of the most emotional and one of the most moving voices that opera has ever heard. But here in 1967 and in the 60s in general, his voice is still very much a Verdi baritone, a solid one, with dramatic temperament. His high notes were already showing a bit of the more sorrowful side that he would later have developed to his voice. But all things concerned, for the majority of his singing, it's still a very solid and a decent Verdi baritone voice. Just not as much interpretation and as much, emotion as he would have later in his career. Which doesn't, fit the requirements of Carlo anyway, because it isn't, emotional sad singing. It's solid and fierce singing, which Cappuccilli does justice earlier in his career. Quechele as Alvaro Gianfranco Quechele, very underrated tenor. And here, earlier in his career, he hasn't taken up the kind of Otello timbre yet. But it is a Verdi voice, it is spinto voice that can cut through the orchestra clearly. Reminiscent of Delmonico, although the interpretation is a bit lacking. There's not much nuance going on there. And Ivo Vinco as Gordiano, a decent bass, but not the best that has ever sung it. Then we have another bunch of recordings. I'm sorry for this. These are 3 recordings with Franco Corelli singing the role of Alvaro. Of course, before these 3, we have the live video recording, but for obvious reasons, I'm going to put that in the 4th category and not this one. But let us talk about his singing there first. His singing there is fresher, much more youthful than the 3 that we're going to talk about here. But these 3 from the 60s are much more interpretational and much more sorrowful in the timbre. So it's to each your own, yeah. So we have 2 recordings from 1965 and 1 from 1968 here. The first one is from February 1965. It has Ettore Bastianini, his last year of singing, of course, as Carlo. It has Gabriella Tucci as Leonora, Joan Grillo as Pregesia, and Giorgio Tozzi as Guardiano. And for our next recording, it is from Philadelphia, 2 months after the Met one, April 1965. This one has Eileen Farrell as Leonora. It has Anselmo Golzani as Don Carlo. Joan Grillo is again Pregesia, but Ezio Flagello, who sang Melitone to Tozzi's Guardiano in the Previtali recording. Shipper's recording, I mean. Here, he takes Guardiano. That proves that he is a great bass. He just unfairly treated, yeah. And our last one is from 1968. This has Corelli as Alvaro, of course, I've already talked about that. Robert Merrill as Don Carlo, Leonton Price as Leonora, Jerome Hines as Guardiano, Louise Pearl as Priosia, and Fernando Correna as Melitone, conducted by Francesco Molinari Pradelli. Yeah. So the first one, 1965 February, Nello Santi conducting. Corelli's Alvaro here. I think that throughout these 3 recordings, they're pretty much the same, because within the span of 3 years, his voice and interpretation of the role hasn't changed much. So I'm not going to repeat myself. In these 3 recordings, Corelli's Alvaro is interpretative in nature, a sorrowful voice for Ottokun Semu de Angeli, a very plaintive voice, but he does retain dramatic temperament and dark singing, of course, in his singing with Carlo. However, it's not as fresh and as straightforward as we would have heard in his 1958 recording. And for the rest of the cast in this February 1965 recording, Gabriella Tucci as Leonora, a translucent voice, a slightly smaller one in nature, but she does do a great effort to try to strive for a dramatic temperament. She doesn't get that 100%, but we can hear, you can hear the actual Italian dramatic voice somewhere in there. But for the most part of it is still a lyrical interpretation in nature, and a translucent voice that is like crystalline and shimmers through the music of Leonora. Bastianini here is Carlo. Of course, one of his last performances, one of his last recordings. He died less than 2 years later, of course, we all know about that. But his singing is no worse here than he is on his earlier Carlos. Giorgio Tozzi as Guardiano, a bit later in his career than the other ones with him that I've talked about, and this one is live, and that's why it has a more deeper, darker, and a more voluminous voice in relatively speaking, yeah. John Grillo, Producia, nothing special. And the next one is 2 months later. Anton Guadagno conducts. At Philadelphia, Eileen Farrell as Leonora. A very overlooked Leonora. She reminds me a bit of a amalgam between Tebaldi and Price in Leonora here. She has the dramatic temperament of Tebaldi and the velvety, silky singing of Price. And just imagine these two sopranos smashed together, and you get Farrell's absolutely exciting and beautiful as well, Leonora. Anselmo Colzani as Carlo. I would say that he is equal to Guelfi, and they're similar in a lot of aspects. And Colzani here is much like Guelfi's Carlo. A outward one, wild singing, Verdi baritone, just everything you want in a Carlo, and that's why I have to put him up there with Guelfi and Warren, Bastianini, Taddei, blah blah blah, on the best Carlos that we have heard. John Grillo again, Producia, Ezio Flagello as Guardiano. I've always insisted that he is a great bass. He has a great low register. He has a voluminous voice, and here he is doing himself justice, and he is doing Verdi's music justice as well. So yeah, we love to see that. For our 1968 recording, we have Robert Merrill as Carlo. Well, his Carlo here is very well sung. It's not any worse than the ones he did in the 50s. Very, very big voice here, although a bit less lyrical and interpretative in nature here, but it's getting more exciting. The voice hasn't decreased in size at all. It hasn't decreased in excitement. It's only increased in how he's focused on just blasting absolutely exciting sounds out, and that's what you want from Verdi, yeah? And Merrill's Carlo here is a treat to listen to. Heinz Guardiano, I've already talked about that. Corena is still great, Melotone, Louise Pearl, nothing special as Producia, but Leontyne Price as Leonora. I would say that her live here, 1968, is in good voice, and the interpretation is still very, very well sung, as is her other Leonoras. But here, live, we can hear a bit more collapsed head voice than 4 years earlier in the studio recording. I'm not too put off by that though, because the interpretation is still very well sung, and she is in her comfortable repertoire, in her Verdian repertoire, and unlike Puccini, which my remarks on Price Tosca has raised quite some controversy. Here, her Verdi is her fit, and it doesn't bother me that much here in Verdi. And of course, she sounds better here in her comfortable Verdian repertoire as well. Yeah. Now, we're going to talk about dark horses, some overlooked recordings, ones that are ignored, but in fact are very good. The first one is from 1951, live from the Glyndebourne Festival, conducted by Fritz Busch with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. It is Walburga Wegener as Leonora di Vargas. Marco Rithmüller is Don Carlo here. David Polleri is Don Alvaro. Mildred Miller is Preziosia. And Bruce Dargavel is Padre Guardiano. Walburga Wegener's Leonora is a treat to listen to, absolutely a treat. She is one of my favorite Salomes, but you would think, Salome, that doesn't sound like her role, that would make a good Leonora. No, her Leonora here, live, is exceptionally sung. It is a German voice, but it has an Italian temperament. It has the dramatic elements that you need in an Italian voice. And then you have the lyrical singing. You have absolutely, the nuances, the details are all there, and it's a very fresh and young voice, which is very pleasant to listen to. And in Leonora, we have the lyricism, we have the dramatism, we have the voice, and Wegener's Leonora is great, is absolutely great, and I don't know why so little people know about her and her Leonora. Marco Rothenmüller here as Don Carlo and David Polleri as Alvaro. Both aren't big names, yeah? But both are great here. David Polleri died way too young. Let's talk about him first, shall we? A very great tenor and a spinto voice that can cut through the orchestra like a sharp sword. And much like DeStefano, he pours his soul out into singing everything, and it is absolutely exhilarating. It is hair-raising, but unlike DeStefano, he actually has a Verdian voice, which does the role of Alvaro justice, and it is very exciting. It slices through the orchestra, and it doesn't fade in comparison to Marco Rothmüller's Don Carlo, which is another very great aspect of this recording, because Rothmüller's Carlo, although not a your typical Verdian baritone, Rothmüller still has great high notes. He can still pour out exciting sounds from his throat, and it is a very exciting duo, Rothmüller and Polleri here. Mildred Miller is decent as Preziosia, so is Bruce Dargavel as Guardiano, but the real star here is Walburga Wegener. Then we have a recording from 1952 in studio, conducted by Armando La Rosa Parodi with the orchestra and chorus of La Scala. Adriana Guerini is Leonora, Anselmo Colzani is Don Carlo, Giuseppe Campora is Don Alvaro, Miriam Pirazzini is Preziosia, Giuseppe Modesti is Padre Guardiano, and Fernando Correna is Melitone. Adriana Guerini, another voice which is so unfairly forgotten. She is one of the last in the lineage of true Italian dramatic sopranos, yeah? And her Leonora here is exciting, is extremely exciting. It has, it's reminiscent of Caniglia's Italian dramatic soprano temperament, but it also has the freshness of the voice of Tebaldi, albeit not too much so as to overpower the dramatic temperament of Italian dramatic soprano singing. And Guerini is just a perfect balance between nuance and excitement, and her Leonora here is absolutely top class. It deserves to be up there with Tebaldi. I truly believe so. And it is exciting in nature. It has chest tones. It has coordinated chest voice, something that almost no soprano has had in our lifetime. And Guerini is absolutely perfect here as Leonora. A very unfairly forgotten artist. Anselmo Colzani, as Don Carlo I've already talked about, but here, a bit like 15 years before the Corelli recording. Here, Colzani is more of a fresh voice, more of a young voice. There's not so much, Verdi beefy, Guelphy kind of a voice going on, but the voice cuts through equally as well as later in his career. Campora as Alvaro is another great voice, a bit smaller in size compared comparing to most spinto tenors, but it is a lyric tenor with enough voice and with a temperament sufficient to cut through the Verdian orchestra. And it is exciting singing, it's straightforward singing, and him and Conzani make a great Alvaro Carlo pairing. Pirazzini, as Patricio I've talked about, Giuseppe Modesti as Gordiano I've talked about, but all things considered, it is a great recording for Guerini, Colzani, and Campora, and all things considered. And then we have two recordings, which are both overlooked, with Anita Cerquetti sharing the title role of Leonora. First one is from 1957, conducted by Nino Sanzogno with the Rai Roma in a radio broadcast. Aldo Protti is Don Carlo, Piera Miranda Ferraro is Don Alvaro, Giulietta Simonato is Preziosia, Boris Christoph is Padre Guardiano, Renato Capecci is Melitone. And our next recording is 1958. This one is live from the Palacio de las Bellas Artes. It is conducted by Antonio Narducci, with Cornel MacNeil as Carlo, Flaviano Labo as Alvaro, Nicola Zaccaria as Padre Gordiano, and Fernando Correna as a Melitone. Let's talk about the 57 Sanzogno first, shall we? This one, obviously done under studio conditions, broadcast as a radio broadcast, and obviously that means that it's not as exciting as the live one, and that goes for the same for Cerquetti singing. This one here is more subdued, not very nuanced, I would say, but subdued. It's not as exciting as the Mexico live a year later, quite obviously, but her Leonora is still decent here. It is nuanced, it is balanced, but it is not exciting, something which we get in the 58 Mexico. Aldo Protti's Carlo I've talked about. Piero Miranda Ferraro as Alvaro. It is one of his best roles, Alvaro, I believe, and Ferraro is an absolutely brilliant dramatic tenor, something that you don't often get in Alvaro, a true dramatic tenor, and he has the voice to cut through the orchestra, a very good Verdi spinto voice with more darkness and more dramatic temperament than other tenors when it comes to, the darkness in the voice. Boris Christoph as Padre Guardiano. I've never been the biggest fan of Christoph, but he's okay here. And Capecci as Melitone is also his normal self. And then we come to 1958 with Antonio Narducci conducting. Here, it's a much, much more exciting recording. Anita Cerquetti's reading of the role of Leonora here, it's much more, outward, much more straightforward, and much more hair-raising. It is absolutely thrilling singing. I mean, this is one of the most thrilling recordings of hers, of all time, and it is, she goes all out here. It is as exciting as the Tebaldi 1955, I'm not even exaggerating, and it is absolutely hair-raising singing from a soprano who obviously has the dramatic temperament necessary, but also the lyric and the gentle, soft singing that we both need in Leonora. Cornel MacNeil as Carlo. What a baritone and what a Carlo. Just absolutely amazing Verdi voice. Even better than Guelfi, dare I say. And his high notes, open high notes, no one has ever come close to, replicating that kind of open high note singing. And again, live recording from Mexico, always exciting stuff. And it is absolutely exciting singing by MacNeil here. Same goes for Flaviano Labo's Alvaro. A voice that cuts through the orchestra very easily, doesn't get dominated by MacNeil's massive volcanic voice, and there's this balance between interpretation and the sword-like voice, a spada voce that Alvaro needs, and Labo has that balance done perfectly well. Nicola Zaccaria and Correna here are both great as well, but Cerquetti's absolutely exhilarating Leonora here is absolutely the star of this recording, and it is one of the best Leonoras live that we have heard, and I don't understand why almost no one talks about this recording. Next, we have another Latin American recording. This time it's from Teatro Colón from Buenos Aires. It's live from 1961, conducted by Fernando Previtali. It has Floriana Cavalli as the Leonora di Vargas, Giuseppe Taddei as Don Carlo, Richard Tucker as Don Alvaro, Aurelio Dominguez as Pregiusia, and Plinio Calabasi as Padre Guardiano. Floriana Cavalli, another excellent soprano who has done the role of Leonora. A very, very crystalline lyric voice, I would say. It has the Italian temperament in it. It's not the red hot dramatic Cornelia kind of Italian sound though. It's somewhat like Gabriella Tucci. It has a very lyric voice, a crystalline sound that can easily climb to high notes, very clear and transparent high notes, and a transparent timbre, and it's brilliant for the lyric part of Leonora. For the dramatic part, she also puts in an effort to put out big sounds. It's not a red hot dramatic Italianate sound, but it is a big sound. And Giuseppe Taddei as Don Carlo. I love Taddei in any role that he has sung, and Carlo is not an exception. Taddei's Carlo is absolutely exhilarating. It is no less exciting than Guelfi's, Colzani's, Warren's, you name it. And Taddei's Carlo is big, it is Verdian, and it is not as beefy as Guelfi, but it has a sort of penetrating and exciting quality that you wouldn't get with the fat sound of Guelfi. And Taddei's Carlo is even better than Guelfi's and Colzani's, dare I say. It is on the level of Warren. It's not better than Warren's, but it is up there. It is absolutely up there. And the pairing with Richard Tucker is unbeatable, because Tucker is kind of more beefy, more round, fatter voice, and Taddei is more of a sword and edged voice, and the contrast between these two is absolutely amazing. Aurelio Dominguez is a great Pregiusia, a very great one, and Plinio Calabasi as Guardiano, much like Flagello, another very underrated bass who just gets thrown to do small roles, comprimario roles. But here as Guardiano, he proves that he has the ability to do big roles, lead roles, with extreme artistry as well. For our last recording or recordings for this category, we have included a set of recordings, two of them, with Carlo Bergonzi as Don Alvaro. The first one is from 1965, conducted by Gianandrea Gavazzeni, live at La Scala. Ilva Ligabue sings Leonora di Vargas. Giulietta Simianato is Preziosia. Capecci is Melitone. And Nikolai Khairov is Padre Guardiano. Don Carlo in Acts 1 and 2 are sung by Piero Cappuccilli, and he pulled out after Act 2, and it was replaced by Carlo Meligiani for the third and fourth act. Now, Bergonzi's Alvaro is a very refined one. Of course, he was a very beautiful voice who always covered, and although it doesn't have that outward Verdian tenor quality, he was still a very good Verdian tenor, because the nuance and the detail that he put into the interpretation and the characterization of the character was not something that many tenors could do. So it is a very detailed and a very nuanced Alvaro, paired with a Leonora of equal nuance and detail, which is one of Ilva Ligabue. Her Leonora has a bit of, a hint of Italian dramatic soprano Tebaldian quality. It has a hint of that in there, but it's not much, but it's present, which allows her to navigate through the dramatic parts without much issue, with exciting singing, of course, but it also enables her to focus on the lyricism, the nuance, the interpretation, and the gentle, touching, and subdued singing in the more lyrical part of Leonora. Kayurov as Padre Guardiano, one of my favorite basses, up there with Siepi, and his Padre Guardiano is also up there with Siepi. Because I've said that Guardiano is not a big, evil, beefy role, and instead requires a bass with a voluminous, low, and a deep and warm voice, and Kayurov is the perfect example of the warm and more kind of interpretational, emotional, sorrowful Guardiano, and that bass voice is perfect for Guardiano, absolutely perfect. And we have our baritones. Cappuccilli for the first two acts. I've already talked about Cappuccilli. He isn't in particularly bad voice here, so I didn't, see the need for him to pull out, but he did anyway, and he was replaced by Carlo Meliciani, who is even better in my opinion. And because most of Carlo's big singing comes in acts 3 and 4, so that's a big advantage for Meliciani. A true Verdian baritone, unlike Cappuccilli. I've mentioned why Cappuccilli isn't, the perfect fit for Verdi, but Meliciani here is. It has the beefy kind of big Verdian voice, but his high notes are also open. They are big, beefy, and exciting in nature. It's exhilarating, and Meliciani is definitely underrated, and his Carlo here is of very, very high quality indeed. But then we have another recording, this time from 1969 in studio, conducted by Lamberto Cordelli with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. It has Antonio Zerbini as the Marquise, Martina Arroyo is Leonora Di Vargas, Piero Cappuccilli finally does the whole role of Carlo here with Bergonzi, and Ruggero Raimondi is Guardiano. Geraint Evans, however, sings Melitone. So this recording, let's start with Arroyo. Arroyo is in very good form in this studio recording. She didn't have the biggest of voices, but she had a very silky, kind of marble quality in her voice, a velvety one, which, was very suitable for studio recording. And here, it captured all her velvet beauty in its most beautiful form. And her artistry here, her musicality, her interpretation is unbeatable. She is a bit lacking in the big dramatic, Italian dramatic parts, but her lyric parts of Leonore, the lyric singing, is very, very velvety, very smooth, very silky, and it is a very great voice. Cappuccilli here as Carlo. He hasn't yet lost the Verdi baritone vocal solidity, nearing the end of the 60s. This is from 1969, but from the mid-70s onwards, it was transforming into a more interpretative, more emotional voice, which isn't suitable for such a straightforward Verdi role, such as Carlo, but here he's still okay. Ruggero Raimondi as Guardiano is a disappointment, as usual, because Ruggero Raimondi is no real bass. He is, just a baritone without the top notes of a baritone. And he should have never done any bass repertoire. Neither should he had done Padre Guardiano. He doesn't have the low notes at all. They're very weak. And Geraint Evans is Melitone, and I would much rather have Geraint Evans sing Guardiano than Ruggero Raimondi. Then we have a few video recordings here. The first one is a film interpretation of La Forza del Destino, conducted by Gabriele Santini from 1949. It has Caterina Mancini as Leonora, Tito Govi as Carlo, Galliano Massini as Alvaro, Chloe Elmo is Preziosilla, and Giulia Neri is Guardiano. This isn't, exactly, the opera. It's extremely cut, it's disfiguringly cut, but that's just the norm for, 40s, 50s opera films, yeah? And the key moments are still there, so I'm fine with that. The singing is of very, very high quality. I mean, Caterina Mancini as Leonora, she is a absolutely beautiful spin to soprano voice. She has, the lyricism, she has the dramatic temperament, but the Italian spin to sound is what matters most for Leonora, and she has it. Tito Gobi as Carlo. um, Piece suffices. Carlo is not a role which needs a lot of emoting. It's not a highly interpretive role. It's straightforward, and that's what Gobi is best at. Straightforward singing, Verdi baritone singing, and Gobi does that without any doubt. Galliano Massini's Alvaro I've already talked about, Neri's Guardiano I've talked about, and Chloe Elmo's Pariziosia is not bad as well. Then we have our classic live video recording conducted by Francesco Molina Pradelli from 1958 from Napoli, a video recording with Renata Tebaldi as Leonora, Ettore Bastianini as Carlo, Franco Corelli as Alvaro, Aurelia Dominguez as Preziosia, and Boris Christoph as Padre Guardiano. Renato Capecci is Melitone here, and Cura is sung by Anna Di Stasio. Very famous video recording, of course, and, well, rightly so. Tebaldi here as Leonora. It's her second best Leonora after the 1955 live. I think that, well, I've already said that this recording, Tebaldi's Leonora, it is an amalgam of the lyrical singing from 53 and 56 and 60 infused into the complete dramatic waltzing in the 55 and 54 recordings. And it is a special recording because Tebaldi is absolutely perfect here. It's perfect. And all things concerned, I think this is better singing than the 55 live. I just prefer that one because it's more exciting. But here she is at her very, very best, and you cannot deny that. And with her acting, physical acting, you can see that, and it is another experience completely. So Tebaldi here, unmissable. Bastianini and Corelli as Carlo and Alvaro. Of course, they have the 65 Met recording, but this one is when the two are in way fresher voice, way more exciting and straightforward and direct, just boom, right at a point. And their acting here is fabulous as well. And all things concerned, Tebaldi, Bastianini, Corelli. What a trio and what a recording. Aurelia Dominguez as Preziosia, one of my favorite mezzos, and she is one of the only mezzos who can, transform Preziosia's music into something actually inspiring and exciting, and something you would actually want to listen to, yeah? Boris Christoph, Guardiano, I've already said that I'm not a big fan of Christoph, not here particularly as well, but Tebaldi, Bastianini, Corelli, Dominguez, what more can you ask for? Next, these are a series of video recordings with Caballé as Montserrat Caballé as Leonora di Vargas. There are 4 of them because, as you know, there are about 5,000 recordings in every opera that Caballé has sung in. This is not an exception. Out of these 4, Caballé's singing is pretty consistent in these 4. Consistent, the lyric singing is absolutely spot on, the pianissimi is absolutely spot on, the floated notes are absolutely spot on, while the dramatic singing is a tad bit underwhelming. It's not bad, but a tad bit underwhelming. But she's pretty consistent in these 4, and I won't go into, each individual performance and how Caballé sings it there. But let me just say that she is a great Leonora because of the pianissimi that he floats, that Leonora needs in her prayer scenes, her pace, first part of the pace at least. And the dramatic singing isn't too bad either for the 70s and 80s. And for these 4 recordings, well, let me introduce them first. The first one is from 1978, live at La Scala, conducted by Giuseppe Patané. Piero Capocilli is Don Carlo, Jose Carrera is Alvaro, Maria Luisa Nave is Preziosia, Nikolai Hairov is Gordiano, and Sesto Bruscantini sings Melitone here. For the 1979 recording, it is from the Gran Teatro del Liceo. It is conducted by Eugenio Mario Marco of 1979 Liceo. The cast here has Montserrat Caballé, of course, as Leonora. Jose Carreras is again Don Alvaro. Don Carlo is Matteo Maniguera. Preziosia is Maria Coder, and Mario Rinaudo is Padre Guardiano. And then we have two recordings from 1982. The first one we have here is from Orange Festival, conducted by Martinez Gomez. It has Hermano Mauro as Alvaro, Silvano Caroli as Carlo, Franca Mattiucci is Preziosia, Gabriel Bacquier is Melitone here, and then Paul Pliszka is Padre Guardiano, Antonio Zerbini is the Marquis of Calatrava. And at last we have another one from 1982. This one is from Madrid. It is conducted by Daniela Lipton, with Nunzio Todisco as Alvaro, Juan Pons as Carlo, Jane Berbi as Preziosia, and Justino Diaz as Padre Guardiano. And let's talk about these from start to finish. 1978 at La Scala with Giuseppe Padone. Capocilli here as Carlo. I've said that I'm from the 70s, late 70s onwards. I love him and his singing. But Carlo is just not a role for late Capocilli. It is a great role for early Capocilli, but not for the late Capocilli. And Jose Carreras is too small a voice for, any tenor role, let alone Don Alvaro, this kind of spinto role, and Carreras is way, way too undervoiced for this role. And that's why he forces his voice, and the result is something ugly. So, not good. But Nikolai Khairov as Guardiano is in very good form here. And I've said why I love Khairov's Guardiano so much, and he blends with Caballé's lyric singing very well as well. And so I love that. It is very good casting. Maria Luisa Naves Preziosia, nothing special really. Sesto Bruscantini is a nice addition as Melitone though. A bit of, buffo here and there from a extremely good baritone who has voice, yeah? For the 79 recording, we have Carreras again as Alvaro, but this time Matteo Maniguera is Carlo, which is an improvement from Capocilli. Maniguera obviously has the Verdi baritone qualities. He has what a Verdi baritone needs, and his singing here as Carlo is also very convincing. It's vocally solid, it's very well voiced, it's big voice, and yes. But the rest of the cast, Preziosia and Guardiano, both are not very good at all. Well, yeah. For the 1982 performances, we start with the one at Orange, and this Orange performance is the superior out of the two from 1982, and I would dare say the best performance out of these four Caballé video performances, mainly because of the rest of the cast. I'm not a fan of Paul Pliszka and his Guardiano. Paul Pliszka is just not a very impressive baritone voice, a very average and cardboard one. But when we take a look at the rest of the cast, it is indeed very, very impressive. Especially Hermano Mauro and Silvano Caroli. Silvano Caroli, of course, is a very, very, very great dramatic baritone. And that dramatism, that extremely dark coloring, even darker than, Warren and Bastianini, even darker than that. And it is it is a very, very exciting Carlo, and that is matched by Hermano Mauro's exciting dramatic tenor singing. So a dramatic tenor and a dramatic baritone, both are very, very dark and that's very rare for the 80s. And we have that here. Hermano Mauro and Silvano Caroli. The rest of the cast isn't bad at all as well. Franca Mattiucci is okay, but we have Gabriel Bacquer, a very, very good French baritone. A bit late in his career, but here he does the brutal role of Melitone very well, as well as Antonio Zerbini doing the small role of the Marquise. Zerbini is also very great, but Caballé, Mauro, and Caroli here really make this a very, very exciting performance. And the fact that it's on video is a rarity for the 80s, for this kind of quality of a performance to be on video. The other video from 1982 from Madrid is a bit less impressive. Caballé is still in good voice here, but Nunzio Todisco as Alvaro, great spinto tenor voice, very, very great voice, and it's ruined kind of by Juan Pons. Usually Juan Pons sounds worse, but here he's okay. But there is still this kind of throatiness and barking quality that we hear in the rest of Pons' recordings that you can still hear in this performance. However, compared to other recordings, he's already relatively in good form here. And Justino Diaz as the Padre Guardiano, a very good voice, but again a bit too high for the role of Guardiano. I would prefer someone with a deeper and a more voluminous voice. Next, we have the famous Metropolitan telecast from 1984 conducted by James Levine. Leontyne Price is Leonora, Leo Nucci is Carlo, Giuseppe Giacomini is Alvaro, Isola Jones sings Preziosia, and Bonaldo Giaiotti is Padre Guardiano. Leontyne Price in this 84 telecast. I think that it is, surely her voice was not as good as the early 60s Price, yeah? But the interpretation here is excellent. The kind of emotion and the nuance that she has here is, you cannot find that in her earlier, younger recordings. Here, maturing a lot, nearly at the very, very end of her career, yeah? 1984, she retired with the Aida in 85, which I've told you about in my Aida video. Here in 84, her Leonora, although the voice isn't, in very good shape, but the interpretation that she gives to the role is much more mature and very insightful compared to her earlier recordings of Leonora. So I like that. It isn't a particularly impressive voice here, but the interpretation is excellent. Now, we come to Alvaro and Carlo, this duo, with Giuseppe Giacomini taking the tenor role and Leo Nucci taking the baritone role. The funny thing is, Giuseppe Giacomini is baritonal in timbre, and Leo Nucci is a tenor in timbre. Well, what I would say is, there is nothing wrong with a baritone who has a excellent top register to be singing tenor roles, which is what Giacomini is doing here. Everything is wrong about a tenor without the top notes of a tenor doing baritone repertoire and thus yelling and barking because he doesn't have the voice to do a baritone role. So yeah, Leo Nucci is even lighter than the tenor Giuseppe Giacomini here, which already proves the point that he is a short tenor. And he barks and he yells, but I don't really care because, 90% of Carlo's music is with Alvaro, and it's funny because the tenor is even darker than the baritone, and it's just a little bit of entertainment for me because, see, that's how bad Nucci is. I don't care because Giacomini is still, being the baritone here, so that's okay. And Bonaldo Giaiotti as Padre Guardiano, he is one of my favorite basses, up there with Siepi and Khairov, and his Guardiano is just as good as Siepi's and Khairov's, because while he doesn't have that much of a moving and emotional voice as Siepi's and Khairov's, his voice still has the darkness the depth of Siepi's role, and it has the voluminous kind of bassy, big quality that a proper Italian bass should have. And Giaiotti does that perfectly here as Guardiano. And Isola Jones as Precisia, not good, not good. But all things concerned, it is a good recording. Just Nucci here is, well, an embarrassment. He is embarrassing himself because he's placing himself next to Giuseppe Giacomini. That's it. Then, for our last video recording or video recordings, I'm at a pair of recordings from 1992 featuring Giuseppe Giacomini again in the role of Don Alvaro. The first one is from Napoli. It is from January 1992, conducted by Daniel Oren. It has Elena Dimitrova as Leonora, Piero Capocilli as Carlo, Luciana Dintino as Preziosia, and Roberto Scandiuzzi as Padre Guardiano. The other one is also from 1992, but it is from Tokyo. The cast has Giovanna Cazzola as Leonora, Renato Brusen as Carlo, Bonaldo Giaiotti as Padre Guardiano, and it is conducted by Yoshinori Kikuchi. Out of these two performances, well, let me go through them. First, the one from Napoli as Elena Dimitrova as Leonora. She's a decent soprano. She knows how to sing Verdi for sure. But I'm just not very impressed by the way that she sings, because it's a big voice for sure, but her technique is not the best, and also there's not much interpretation going on in her singing. Capocilli here as Carlo, I've explained why the late Capocilli is not, that convincing as Carlo, but Giacomini here is in excellent form. It's even darker, it's much darker than, 8 years ago in the Met telecast. Here, it's basically two dramatic baritones singing, and Giacomini at some points sounds even darker than Capocilli. That is not suggesting that Capocilli is a short tenor. He is obviously not. He has the capability to do, Verdi repertoire, but Giacomini is that dark and is that good. Well, the rest of the cast is not that good. Scandiuzzi is terrible as Guardiano. Luciana Dintino is not good as Preziosia. But, Giacomini, Capocilli, and Dimitrova are the three of them are good. Especially Giacomini. And that's what you can expect from a performance from the 90s. The other one, from the same year from Tokyo, with Yoshinori Kikuchi conducting, well, that one has Giovanna Cazzola as Leonora. Cazzola, I would say, has the same issues as Dimitrova. It is typical for, Italian sopranos in the 80s and 90s. They have voice, unlike sopranos post 2000, but the interpretation is just not there, and the technique is sometimes a bit off. However, in this performance, we have Renato Brusen as Carlo. He is similar to Capocilli in the role of Carlo, just not, a very, very solid voice for Verdi towards the end of their careers. But Brusen is in okay form here. Bonaldo Giaiotti as Guardiano here is what makes the Tokyo more valuable than the Napoli. But all things considered, overall for the two performances, I'd say they're pretty similar in artistic value. But Giacomini is absolutely perfect as the role of Alvaro. The rest of the cast, some of it is okay, some of it is not so okay. But it all comes down to which aspects of this opera you value more. Now we come to commercially available recordings to avoid. The first one is sung in German. It's from 1952 for a radio broadcast. It is conducted by Hans Schmidt-Iserstedt, with Carla Martinez as Leonora de Vargas, Josef Metternich as Don Carlo, Rudolf Schock as Don Alvaro, Martha Mödel as Preziosia, Gustav Neidlinger as Fra Melitone, and Gottlob Frick as Padre Guardiano. Sounds like a pretty good cast. Why would you not suggest this recording? Well, there are quite a few problems here and there. Let's start with Leonora, the most important role. Carla Martinez is way too small a voice to be singing any Verdi. It is a thin, wiry voice. Although she, handles the dynamics really well here, she has a very beautiful pianissimo, but the musicality is completely lacking, and overall, it's just too small a voice for the dramatic parts of Leonora, and the kind of wiry kind of voices is not very, effective in the big dramatic Italian dramatic soprano, spinto soprano repertory. It's just too small. And for Carlo and Alvaro, Joseph Metternich and Rudolf Schock are both singers that I absolutely adore. But here, it's just a bit lacking. Rudolf Schock as Alvaro, he is a very characteristic German lyric tenor, and he can do Italian opera. He can, but here it's a bit awkward as Alvaro. It's just lacking that Verdi temperament. Yeah, it's just a bit lacking in that. And Metternich as Carlo, he just doesn't fully encompass the Verdian way of baritone singing. It is big, beefy, it has open high notes, it is absolutely all out. But Metternich, being such a great German baritone interpreter, doesn't completely, live up to the Verdian expectations. Same goes with Rudolf Schock. Gottlob Frick as Padre Gordiano, way too dark a voice, way too dark. I know that, basses should always be dark, and the darker the better. Yes, but this is not Hagen. Guardiano is, a father figure. It is a guardian figure, and it is not a evil guy trying to take over the world. No, that's what Gottlob Frick reminds us of in every single role. And here as Guardiano, it's just a bit too heavy, too suffocating. Yeah. Martha Merdel as Preziosia is very interesting, and I always, love to hear something that you completely don't expect a singer to be singing in. Myrtle, Wagnerian soprano, Wagnerian mezzo, Strauss mezzo, singing Preziosia, the worthless, just fluff, buffo Italian mezzo singing. It doesn't take much explanation why this isn't the best. Preziosia will hear. And Gustav Nadlinger as Melitone. This is, a good part of the cast. But Nadlinger, he just doesn't, fully encompass Italian opera as well. I love his buffo singing, I love his Alberich, but Melitone is not the same as Alberich. It's completely different. And all things considered, no. Next, we have a studio recording from 1976, conducted by James Levine with the LSO. It has Leontyne Price as Leonardo Vargas, Cheryl Millens as Don Carlo, Placido Domingo as Don Alvaro, Fiorenza Casotto as Preziosia, Gabriel Bacquier as Melitone, Bonaldo Gaiotti as Guardiano, and Kurt Moll as the Marquis di Calatrava. This is not a bad recording at all, but it is very underwhelming. Because you look at this cast, these are, some of the most famous names in all of opera. In one single recording, you would expect it to be one of the best recordings of this opera. But it simply isn't. It's decent, and that's it. Let me break it down. Firstly, Leontyne Price as Leonora here. She is in very good voice for 1976, I have to admit that. And her artistry is there. Everything is there. But what I feel like is that this studio recording doesn't do her Leonora justice, because of course a lot of that is manipulated, but it just doesn't give off the impression that her earlier studio recording gives us, the 64 one. And I know that she's more mature here, she has more artistry here, but at the same time, it doesn't give off the same impression that the 84 telecast gives us. So it's a bit of a awkward situation for Price's voice and her artistry here in Leonora. And she is, perhaps the best part of this recording. But when the standards set by these 64 and 84 performances are set so high, this just seems a bit underwhelming. But the rest of the cast is not that good either. Cheryl Milnes as Carlo. Carlo is a very big Verdi role, a very stereotypical Verdi role. While Milnes can handle some other Verdi roles, Carlo is not one for him because um, it really needs a beefy voice, and Milnes doesn't have a beefy voice. It is a thin, a a edged and a sharp, a voice that has a lot of bite, and that is, very suitable for Scarpia, let's say. But Carlo is a beefy voice, is a fat voice, and that Verdi baritone temperament is what Milnes doesn't have. Domingo here as Alvaro, I have to admit again that Domingo is in very good voice for 1976, but you can hear that he's struggling with his high notes, in quite a lot of places, and so that's not very convincing. Yeah, you don't want to hear a strained kind of painful sound in Alvaro's top notes, which are everywhere. Fiorenzo Cosotto as Preziosia, okay, I have no comment on that. Just decent, nothing more than that. Gabriel Baclier as Melatonin is good. Bonello Giotti as Guardiano is good. But Kurt Moll as the Marquise di Calatrava, it's a small role, but it just ruins your experience of hearing it because it's so nasal. It's such an unpleasant voice to listen to. So if you just start off the entire recording with this unpleasant nasal voice, you don't want to continue listening to it. Yeah. So all in all, not a bad recording at all, I must say that again, but a very underwhelming one. Next, we have a recording from 1981. This one is live, but it is very easy to find and commercially available. It is conducted by John Matheson with the BBC Concert Orchestra. Leonora is Martina Arroyo, Don Carlo Peter Glossop, Don Alvaro Kenneth Collins, and Guardiano is Don Gerard. What should I say about this recording? Arroyo and Glossop are both very, very good singers in their prime. This is way past their prime. Arroyo here is Leonora. Of course, she still has that interpretation. She still has that musicality in this recording. But it is way past her prime. Way, way past her prime. And it is, a bit painful to hear those strained notes here and there. And it's a bit old. The voice is a bit loose as well. So yeah, not good. Peter Glossop as Carlo is somewhat of the same case. Too old here to be doing, these very demanding Verdi baritone roles. And it's a bit loose here and there, and it's just a lackluster reading of the role. That I have no doubt that Glossop in this prime would have been a very, very good Carlo, but this is just not it. Kenneth Collins, however, as Alvaro is not good at all. It is a thin, nasal, and a very unpleasant voice to listen to. And as Alvaro, he is way, way too small a voice, and the nasality, the acidity of the voice doesn't help. Don Gerard is also nothing special as Padre Guardiano, so all things considered, this is not one that you should consider. Then we have a recording from 1985 in studio, conducted by Giuseppe Sinopoli with his Philharmonia Orchestra. Rosalind Plowright is Leonora, Renato Brusin is Carlo, Jose Carreras is Alvaro, Agnes Balta is Preziosia, Juan Pons is Melatonin, Pata Burculadze is Padre Guardiano, and John Tomlinson is the Marquise di Calatrava. Plowright as Leonora, it isn't a bad voice, but it's just not a good Leonora. It is not a good Verdi voice. I mean, I don't know what gave her the idea to do the Verdi soprano repertoire, but it doesn't suit her at all. And the result is some ugly singing, which I know isn't her best. And it is yelled out. It is lacking in artistry completely. It is lacking in musicality, and it's not a good recording of Leonora. Renato Rusin isn't a big issue as Carlo, but Jose Carreras as Alvaro is a big issue. I've already explained that. Juan Pons as Melatonin. Well, his ugly aspects of singing is amplified here in studio. And Pata Burkuladze is another very ugly, very throaty voice as Guardiano, which is not what you want in a warm, comforting, um, deep bass role. And Burkuladze is exactly the opposite of that. Agnes Balza as Preziosia, it doesn't matter. It's not. It's just average. And John Tomlinson as Marquise is another ugly voice. And all in all, not a good recording. And the last one is under Riccardo Moody from 1986 in studio. Mirella Freni is Leonora, George Zanganaro is Carlo, Placido Domingo is Alvaro, Dolores Ajik is Preziosia, Sisto Bruscantini is Melatone, and Paul Pleshka is Guardiano. Freni as Leonora here. It would be quite unusual to say that, but I think Leonora is even a worse decision for Freni than Aida was, because Aida's big singing all comes in, the ensembles and stuff, but Leonora has very, very abundant solo dramatic big singing, and her voice just couldn't handle that. And I mean, her Aida is acceptable because there are, some parts that require extreme lyric singing, but here as Leonora, she's even, lost the ability to sing softly and beautifully in the lyric parts because of, the exploitation in her dramatic part of the voice, and because it's been, pushed so much, it's already structurally lost its structural integrity of the voice, and that's why it is loose and she can no longer pull off the beautiful soft singing. Domingo here as Alvaro in 86 is not good at all. Obviously, nothing from the 80s with Domingo was good, and Zancanaro is a very good Carlo. It's just a pity that most of it is with this unlistenable Domingo. Sisto Bruscandini is a good Melotone, but Plishka is an average Guardiano, and Dolores Ajika as Preziosia is also not very inspiring. But we're back for some hella good singing, because this is the category for good aria scenes or excerpts from this opera. We start off with an absolute banger. It is from Rio de Janeiro, conducted by Antonino Votto from 1951. It is a live recording of excerpts running for an hour and a half, and all the most important scenes are in there, yeah? Elisabetta Barbato is Leonora di Vargas, Enzo Mascherini is Carlo, Beniamino Gilli is Alvaro, Giulio Neri is Padre Guardiano, and Giuseppe Modesti sings the Marquise. Elisa Barbato is such a great voice. It reminds me of Tebaldi a lot, because the lyric part of her singing is just like Tebaldi's marbly, creamy singing, and the dramatic parts of her singing are just like Tebaldi's dramatic Italian red hot singing. And she is very similar to Tebaldi, but not worse than Tebaldi at all. And she is a very, very great Leonora, and I have no idea why she is so ignored right now. And such a great voice, such a great Leonora, and it is matched by Beniamino Gilli's Don Alvaro. Although a bit late in his career here, 1951, he is still singing with his heart out. He is just putting everything into this Verdi singing, and he is singing his soul out. You know that he's putting it all out, straightforward and very direct singing. And he interpolates a high C sharp at the end of Act 1, which is absurd. For Gilli in 1951, which puts him at the age of 61. To have such a ringing C sharp is crazy. And Mascherini as Carlo, another great voice, a warm one, but a beefy Verdi baritone voice, which is, the requirements of the role of Carlo. Giulio Neri as Guardiano, I've talked about that, and Modesti is a bit of a luxurious casting as the Marquise, and I'm not complaining at all. But Barbato and Gili in this performance are just absolutely electrifying. Next, we have, again, some excerpts, but these are studio excerpts conducted by Arturo Basile with the Rai Torino Orchestra from 1956. It has Gian Giacomo Guelfi as Giancarlo and Franco Corelli as Alvaro. These are 40 minutes of Alvaro and Carlo's solo arias and their duets together. It's, well, a lot, obviously, because most of this opera is just these two guys fighting and stuff. But Guelfi, I've already talked about his Carlo. Corelli's Alvaro, I've already talked about. But this is just, it's even earlier, and it's even more exciting and fresh, and it's more all out, yeah? It's exciting, it's direct, and it's perfect. Then I've chosen two versions of Leonora's big scene, Pace Pace Mio Dio. The first one is sung by Celestina Boninsegna, recorded in 1911, and it is a absolutely dramatic timbre. It is very, very dramatic singing, and the sound quality is very good as well. But back to Boninsegna, she is, the example of the Italian dramatic soprano. The proper chest coordination, the proper dramatic temperament. It does not have the, old lady matronly characteristics of Canilia, which some people might complain, but it is extremely straightforward. It has very beautiful, rounded, marbly tones in lyrical singing, and it has red-hot, dramatic temperament in the dramatic parts of the aria of Pace Pace Mio Dio, namely the Maledizione. It is perfect in both aspects, and if you don't like Canilia because of the matronly voice, there is no excuse to dislike Boninsegna, and it is an absolutely spot-on, perfect recording of Pace Pace. Now for something very different. It is still Pace Pace, but it is sung by Gwyneth Jones in her studio recital album in 1966, conducted by Arjo Quadri. This Pace Pace is still perfect, but not in the way that Boninsegna's is. I've always insisted that Gwyneth Jones is one of the greatest Verdian sopranos of all time, and if it were not for her to, stumble into Wagner and extremely heavy repertoire, she would have been one of the greatest sopranos ever. Because the timbre and sheer beauty in her voice, her young one, when she was doing Verdi, is insuperable. It is a creamy, a translucent and glimmering, a crystalline timbre while having the marbly quality and the Verdian temperament, and all of that is there, and it's gone when she just proceeds to yell out Brünnhildes and Electras, and I'm not complaining about those. Those are good in their own ways, but she would never have the same impact that she had made with her Verdi, and she didn't stick in the Verdian repertoire very long. But this, from 1966, when she was still a full-blown Verdi soprano, is a representation of why she would have made a great Verdi soprano. It is creamy, it is crystalline, all of that I've mentioned. The soft singing is there, the pianissimo is there, the big dramatic maledizione is there, because, well, she's known for her big voice, but her lyrical, gentle part of singing is so often ignored. Her big voice part is there at the maledizione, but for the rest of the aria, it is extremely gentle and very nuanced, very detailed, and top-class Verdian singing. Then for our last inclusion, these are excerpts sung by Rosa Poncel in her 1928 studio recording sessions. Poncel recorded a lot from Forza. She recorded Pace Pace at least 5 times. She recorded La Vergine degli Angeli at least 5 times as well, I believe. And she also recorded a final scene, Non imprecare umiliati. But the best out of the bunch, all 3 of them, are from the 1928 studio recording sessions. The 28 Pace is better than the rest of the Paces. The 28 La Vergine degli Angeli is better than the other Vergine degli Angelis. And there's only one final scene, yeah? So these 1928 documents, her Pace Pace is absolutely stunning because, again, Poncel, the perfect Verdi voice. The marbly, smooth, velvety timbre with the pianissimi in the soft singing and the absolutely dramatic volcano blast in the Maledizione. For La Vergine degli Angeli, it is more so the first part with lyric singing, and it has Ezio Pinza as the Guardiano's vocals there as well. So yeah, nice addition. And for the final scene, it has Giovanni Martinelli and Ezio Pinza along with Poncel. And what a trio, because, well, Martinelli is still very good in the 20s, because later on his singing became more and more cardboard and uninspiring, but in the 20s it still had that youth and freshness to the voice, which I particularly admire about Martinelli, and Pinza is still his great self. And these 3, they make a great blend. It is a beautiful harmony, and the balance between the 3 is unequaled in any other final scene of Forza. And all of that considered, these 3 recordings of Poncel's Forza from 1928 are extremely, extremely good. So that's the video for you. It has been great pleasure making this video, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Peace out.